Welcome to the Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Drew Mazias, in while Stephanie Haney is out today and tomorrow. Happy Monday, and thanks for joining us. I declare, after all, there is no enjoyment like reading. How much sooner one tires of anything than of a book. Words from Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice to mark today's summer book show. It's an annual tradition we have here on the Sound of Ideas to mark the days getting longer and the temperatures climbing. Because there are few joys like packing a book for a trip to the beach, lounging in the backyard in the hammock with a good read, or even passing the sweltering dog days inside on the couch with a dog-eared favorite. Today, our collection of Northeast Ohio bibliophiles will share some of their favorite reads from the last several months and what they're looking forward to for the rest of the year. They'll also share some suggestions on how to keep your kids reading this summer, or maybe even tips on putting down that screen, that smartphone device, and maybe picking up a good book. With me now for the conversation are Karen Long, former manager of the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards and one of IdeaStream's go-to book gurus. Karen, good to see you.
Good morning.
Lori Muller-Zaim is here. She's the owner of Fireside Bookshop in Chagrin Falls. Lori, welcome to the Sound of Ideas.
Thank you.
Also here is George Bilger. He's a poet and a professor of English at John Carroll University. George, good to see you again.
Good to be here, Drew.
And Kate Merline joins us. She's branch services supervisor at the Orange branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library. Kate, welcome to you as well.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, we want you in on this conversation as well, and your recommendations. Give us a call, 866-578-0903, or send us an email, soi@ideastream.org. You can also message us on Instagram or at The Sound of Ideas. It's always a better conversation when you, the audience, shares what you've been reading or what suggestions you want. Again, that number is 866-578-0903 or email soi@ideastream.org. All right, to get this going, I want to do a around the horn question, and it is I want to know your favorite thing that you've read from maybe the last 6 months or so. Karen, if you're prepared, I'll start with you first. I'll put you on the spot.
Let's go. My obsession of late is a thin novel called Mule Boy by Andrew Krivak. Came out in February. It's 190 pages of what I would argue is near perfection. It tells a story of a man at the end of his life who, when he was 13 in 1929 in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, was in the last year that the mines sent children down to bring the coal back with mules. There's an accident on New Year's Day, and he is the only one of his group to come through alive. At the end of his life, the descendants of the men who died with him find out that he's in New Hampshire and start driving towards him to ask those fundamental questions about what their loved ones said in the final hours, in the dark. And of course, they talked about who they loved. And we don't understand until the very end how this child survived when the men didn't. It is absolutely heart in mouth beautiful. He also wrote The Sojourn, which won the Chautauqua Prize 10 years ago. And it's very Slovakian because the immigrants in the mine there are Slovakian. So that language and that sensibility is braided throughout. If I was standing on a street corner and didn't know you, I'd try to force this book on you.
Mule Boy by Andrew Krivak is the title for that again. Kate, why don't you follow that up with your pick?
Well, I'm going to take you up on Mule Boy. But my pick is London Falling, A Mysterious Death in a Gilded City, and a Family Search for Truth. And it is by Patrick Radden Keefe, who is known for Empire of Pain, his book about the Sacklers, and Say Nothing. He has a podcast, and it is a story about 19-year-old Zach Bretler, who fell to his death from a London high-rise in November of 2019. And this is the story of his parents trying to find out what happened to him. And it is just a bonkers story. Over the course of the book, they find out he had been living a double life that had gotten him entangled in the London Underground. And you learn so much about what went wrong, what was going on in London at the time. I love how he frames the story. This is such a propulsive read. It's as any we'd find in a thriller. I read it in a couple sittings, and I think if you are a fan of David Grann, who wrote Killers of the Flower Moon, or Eric Larson, he's just a master of narrative nonfiction.
So I go to the gym and I do ride a stationary bike, and sometimes I will read books for the show and just kind of two birds with one stone. And there's an older gentleman that sees me there all the time, and he stopped me and he just goes, "I have to tell you about this book." And that was the book that he recommended to me because he always sees me there reading. He's like, "You'll love it, you'll love it." It's the guy that did Say Nothing. So yeah, London Falling. All right, Lori, what do you got for us for your favorite read of the last couple months?
My favorite read is Life and Death and Giants by Ron Rindo. It's just a really great story, and you fall in love with the giant whose name is Gabriel Fisher. He's a gentle giant, and he's born into an Amish community. Everyone loves him, humans and animals alike. But soon he has to choose between a quiet, devout life or the fame of being an athlete. His choice changes everything. The story is tragic and uplifting and told with great tenderness. And like I said, I just fell in love with Gabriel, the giant, and the characters all came to life for me. It was just a really, really excellent book.
Life and Death and Giants by
Yes.
Ron Rindo.
Rindo,
Rindo.
yes.
All right, George, let's round out this first question with your
Well,
pick.
yeah, I teach at John Carroll here in Cleveland, and I just taught a novel class. And I put together a reading list. And one of the novels I chose was partly because I was influenced by Karen and a review she wrote years ago of a book I just absolutely love called The Imperfectionists. It's by a young British writer named Tom Rockman. The book was actually published, I'd say, probably a dozen years ago, 15 years ago. And it's set around 2006, 2008, when the smartphone is coming out, the world is going digital. The setting is a small international newspaper in Rome. And the novel is what's called a linked novel. Every chapter can stand alone as a separate story, but each chapter is told from the point of view of a different person in the newsroom at this failing international newspaper. And I've seldom read a novel that made me laugh as hard as this novel. And it's also a very beautiful story of the end of a kind of print journalism and the changing of the guard. I was saying to Karen, it's 11 chapters long. I read this thing and I got to the end of the 10th chapter and I loved it so much I stopped reading and I went back and reread it, partly because I didn't want it to be over and partly because I wanted to figure out how Tom Rockman pulled it off. It's just a miracle of a novel. And if you pick this up, you will have a great summer read, guaranteed.
The Imperfectionist.
The
by
Imperfectionist,
Tom Rockman.
Tom Rockman, Rachman.
And we're going to have a lot of suggestions for our audience members out there. So if you miss any of them, don't worry. You can go on today's website. We'll have an entire list. That's ideastream.org/SOI. We'll have an entire list of suggestions from not only our panelists, but some suggestions from IdeaStream staff members and any listeners that call in. We'll put those suggestions out there. I want to do another round the horn, and I want to talk specifically about novels. We talked about a couple already, but maybe a second favorite novel that you've read or a particular summer read novel that you might want to recommend to our audience members. Karen, you ready to
I
kick this one
am.
up?
I am. So I have long adored the writing of Colson Whitehead, and he does very serious fiction like Nickel Boys and The Underground Railroad, for which he's received all the laurels. But he has a gift for mixing genre, and he is capping off his crime trilogy this July when his final book, Cool Machine, comes out. And I'm pulling it down because it's so summery in the sense it's entertaining, it's fast, it's witty. It gives you a whole ecosystem. It teaches you about the practice of crime and corruption, and yet you can't help but pull for the criminals. And if you are just dying to get going, you can read the first two books, Harlem Shuffle and Crook Manifesto, but you don't need to. He's so good at the ice creamy sentence that you will find this a summer favorite, I think.
I think Colson White has been on a perennial recommendation from someone on our panel, either on the January book recommendation show or the summer reading show. I remember reading Underground Railroad many years ago, but
Yes.
yeah, just what a great author. Kate, another novel that you would like to recommend?
Yes, so I can't leave here without mentioning Theo of Golden, which is on many a wait list at the library and has been for so long. And the story behind it is really interesting. This was written by Alan Levy, who had kind of a life before his debut novel. He was a judge, he was a songwriter, he's a little bit older, and he self-published this novel. And it really grew and grew by word of mouth. And I love a good word of mouth novel. So it starts by we have an older man named Theo, and we don't know anything about him. He arrives in Golden, which is a town in the south, and he goes around and visits just the places in the town and gets to know the townspeople. And he comes upon a coffee shop where he discovers that there's a wall of portraits, and the portraits are all painted of the town's residents. And for reasons we don't yet know, he decides that he will purchase all of the portraits and present them as gifts to their subjects. And this book is told in the series of vignettes. It's very simple, but during these vignettes, Theo and the reader get to know the stories of the inhabitants of that town. And this book is just such about kindness, about taking the time to really see one another. And the remarkable thing is when I talk to patrons about it, they tell me they are inspired to be better people. They want to bring more kindness and be more attentive to others, and you don't see that a whole lot. So that is Theo of Golden.
Very serendipitous. We got an email from Christine at 9:16 just coming in that says, I'd like to hear her thoughts about Theo of Golden by Alan Levy. How about that? And then Fit Into Me by Molly Gaudry. Anyone familiar with that one?
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, another vote from an audience member for Theo of Golden by Alan Levy. Lori, thoughts on another novel that you'd like to recommend?
Well, let me just say about Theo of Golden.
Yes.
Everyone in my book group really enjoyed it, and that's pretty unusual. And it's a positive book, and I think we need that right now. And it's a great book.
That's a recent one that just came out? Theo of Golden? Or
It's a couple years
6
old.
months.
Okay.
Oh, is it that old?
But he self-published it first, and then because it became so big, a big publisher picked it up, and now it's been on the bestsellers list.
Nice.
We had trouble getting enough of the books. We always, even though we're a bookstore and not a library, we had always a long wait list. Yeah. So the book that I'm recommending for summer reading is The Calamity Club by Catherine Stockett. It came out just in time for the summer. Of course, she wrote The Help 17 years ago, and I'm sure everybody remembers that book. It was iconic. The Calamity Club is set in a small town, Oxford, Mississippi, in 1933, and it follows 3 strong women who band together to overcome their misfortunes. Meg lives in the town orphanage after having been abandoned by her mother. She is close to aging out of the home and doesn't know what to do next. Bertie and Frances are sisters who find themselves at the end of their rope. The 3 women come up with a terrible, awful, but profitable idea. And like I said, I've just started it, so I don't know what that idea is yet, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Nice. The Calamity Club by Catherine Stockett.
Yes.
And George, another a novel that you want to recommend?
Yeah, I'll mention 2 novels by the same author. One novel is a really quick read, very short. The other is a great big novel. And Dennis Johnson has been a favorite writer of mine for many years. He's just one of the great prose stylists of the English American language. And this is a book called Train Dreams, teeny weeny little book. It's probably 110 pages. And it's set in turn of the century America, just after World War I. And it's about a strange, quiet loner of a man named Robert Granier, who arrives in a small Idaho town as an orphan with very little recollection of where he came from. And he's a loner. He lives alone in the woods. He works on as a lumberjack. He works on the building the railway. And he meets a woman in town, marries her, and she and their son are killed in a terrible fire. But really, it's a small human drama set against the much larger drama of America kind of coming of age. At the beginning of the novel, he's an orphan in a tiny town. At the end of the novel, as an old man, he travels on the railway he helped build to the big city of Spokane and watches on TV John Glenn being launched into space. It's a strange, dreamlike novel, but you can read it. And then I taught this this past semester, and one of my students said, "Did you know that is a movie?" And I said, "No, I didn't." But you can read the novel, and it's a terrific film on Netflix. It's just a beautiful movie. The other book by Dennis Johnson, if you're looking for a great big summer read and an essential book to me, is his novel about, it's really about the 1960s, called Tree of Smoke. Won the National Book Award, I would say around 2010 or something. Begins with the assassination of JFK, moves into Vietnam, and an exploration of the turbulent energies of the 60s. And it's big and sprawling and a compelling read.
I want to follow up and talk about Train Dreams a little bit because, again, it was up for several Academy Awards,
yeah.
a lot of critical acclaim. And I'm wondering, I feel like we're at a time where books are maybe facing competition from, movies, TVs, our smartphones, everything. Have you found, especially with students, that something that maybe has a film adaptation is an effective way to get them to read
Absolutely. In fact, if I'm going to teach a novel class, I usually look for novels that have been made into films, partly because it's such an interesting conversation to have with the students. That basic question, well, what did you like more, the movie or the novel, and why? And it gets students thinking about different ways of presenting narratives. And I hate the idea of somehow suggesting that literature is superior to film and, read the book. The book is always better than the movie. I don't think that's so necessarily true. We read Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men and then saw the film. And McCarthy is a great writer. He's one of my favorite writers. All of the students preferred the film. And in some ways I thought, the film it's a little more streamlined. In some ways it works a little better. But it's a nice way of bringing people into literature.
And if I can jump in on your ideas, George, I agree with you. The book isn't always better, but I emphatically think Train Dreams is so much better, despite the beautiful cinematography, despite the beautiful acting. And the reason I think that is that Johnson trusts the reader more than the director trusts the viewer, because the morality of the central character is more complicated, and his haunting makes more sense if you know that he was complicit in something that the movie glosses.
Yes, the story of the Chinese worker.
Yes.
Yeah, I won't give anything away to our watchers, but it's such an interior novel that I think that filming it was quite a challenge, and I agree with you. I don't think the film works as well.
And I give that book as presents, partly because I grew up in the Pacific Northwest where it's set. And my brother and I believe that one of our grandfathers has a lot in common with Grenier, which makes it so resonant for our family.
Another vote for Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson. If you're just joining us on The Sound of Ideas, it is our summer book recommendation show. We're going to be taking this conversation the full hour, so we want your thoughts, your questions. What should you be reading this summer? Maybe what you read recently that you really loved. 866-578-0903. Again, that phone number is 866-578-0903, or you can send us an email, soi@ideastream.org. Vijay sent us an email. He says, Dear Drew, as the weather warms up, I've been thinking about the Caribbean. I reflect on Charmaine Wilkerson's Black Cake, a splendid recent novel with much family drama and some family secrets in Jamaica and beyond. And then he goes on to write, as part of the statewide celebration of Toni Morrison all year, I plan to read Sula, all set here in good old Ohio. Thoughts on rereading any Toni Morrisons? I know we've talked about her on The Sound of Ideas, the community-wide reading project for Toni Morrison.
Well, I went back and reread Beloved and had not read that for years. And something about, amazingly, I find myself becoming an old person and going back and reading books that you loved when you were much younger. I think I probably read Beloved when I was, I probably read it around 1990. And going back to and reliving, re-experiencing the sheer genius of that novel. I was a different person when I read it the first time than I am now, and I saw it in a different way. And so, if you haven't gone back to Beloved, I strongly recommend it. Man, what a great book!
Yeah. I want to use that as a jumping off point to something I want to ask you all about, and that's revisiting a classic piece of literature or something that isn't necessarily new. Is there anything that's been on your reading list that you finished recently, a classic, something that is impacting you in a different way now as an older person than when you read it originally? Anyone want to jump in on that?
Well, I
Kate?
will.
Yeah.
Last year, Jane Austen celebrated a big birthday, 250 years. And I had to actually admit to my book club that I had never read any Jane Austen, and I needed to rectify that. So we did a group reading of Pride and Prejudice. And we actually brought in a couple of different versions of the movie, and we compared and contrast. And
All 20 of them.
Exactly. Colin Firth all the way. But what I found really interesting was I have a group of very seasoned readers, and several of them told me that high school had ruined reading these books for them.
Oh, man.
Because it was such, like you had to learn. And when they read it in a book club after having some years behind us, they really enjoyed it. And I just loved it. So I'm now on to others of hers.
Nice.
So it was just such a great discovery.
Well, speaking of Jane Austen, a book that I'm rereading because I loved it so much the first time I read it many years ago is by the new Jane Austen. I don't know if you're familiar with a wonderful writer named Barbara Pym. She's a British writer, and she has been called, I guess, the contemporary Jane Austen. She writes novels of manners with the same kind of lapidary precision and understanding of human nature that Austen does. She has a terrific novel. This is Barbara Pym, P-Y-M, called Quartet in Autumn. And it's about 4 friends, elderly people, just on the verge of retirement. They're all single. They all lead their own private lives. They only know each other through work. And the novel follows that complicated and harrowing time in life when your social relations are breaking down because you've outlived everyone, and your time as a worker is coming to an end, and you're facing big challenges like loneliness. And it is a beautiful and lyrical book. And I went back and reread it, and it really stands up.
Karen, any classics you've decided to revisit or?
I'm going to cop to the fact that I'm reading for a prize, and I am only reading things hot off the griddle.
Yeah. Or Lori, what about you? Any
So-
classics that have been flying off the shelves from Fireside that you would want to give a shout out to?
Well, an older book that I'll recommend is The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. And it's not that old, but it's been a huge seller at our store. And it talks about the Great Lakes and let me see what
By Dan Egan.
By Dan
is the
Egan,
author. Yeah,
yeah.
he's been on our program before
Has
talking about
he?
yes.
Oh,
yes.
nice. Yes. It makes me want to explore all of the Great Lakes someday. So, yes, that's the one that I would recommend.
Excellent. We got an email from Scott, and he said, I'm rereading 2 books I got last year, Earth is a Nuclear Planet and The LNT Report by Mike Conley and Tim Maloney. Both books outline our civilization's energy systems and go into a great deal on the benefits of adding nuclear power to the mix of a clean and prosperous future. So kind of some dense reading for Scott, and I want to use that as a jumping off point to ask what you like to read in the summer. Is it, we've heard a couple recommendations that are stories with vignettes or shorter books. Do you tend to grab something smaller when you're heading out to the beach or going and relaxing in the backyard, or do you see it as a time to maybe dig into something more complicated and complex that you've been putting off? Thoughts from Karen, you want to start here?
Reading is a little like playing the piano, and we all start out with chopsticks. But if you persist, you can tune your instrument so that the music is better and better. And so I just am interested in the books that the language will create a whole world for me. And one of the big surprises for me was House of Day, House of Night, which published in December. And it's by Olga Tokarczuk, who has a Nobel Prize in Literature, and it's the first book of hers I've picked up. She's Polish, and I'm really at a loss to describe it. It is so good, this is going to sound weird, that on page 222, she's writing about roof tiles, and my heart rate increased.
Wow.
It's
You're easily entertained.
then maybe that's the problem. But she's talking about rural mountainous Poland through the centuries, through mushroom hunting, through these practices of the saints there and the people who write about the saints there. And all of this does sound like paint drying. And it's so frigging good. So that is House of Day, House of Night, A Whole World Conjured by Olga Tokarczuk.
Karsik. Kate, a pattern of reading over the summer. Do you like to grab something light or small, or is it something like London Falling, kind of more heavier?
And yes, I think it can be a time where you really dig into something meaty, but you can also do essays. I like short stories during the summer. But it's also a really good time to try maybe a genre you haven't dipped into. Try something different. I read a really interesting book. It's by Isabel Kim. It's called Sublimation. And she was an award-winning science fiction short story writer, also attorney. A lot of attorneys and doctors writing these days. But this is her debut novel. And the underlying premise is that when someone emigrates, they actually leave a physical copy of themselves behind in their country of origin. And they call that an instance. And so when you leave, you are instancing. And our main character leaves Korea at 10 years old to come to America. And her American self never imagines returning to Korea at any point until her grandfather dies. And her Korean instance actually calls her home for the funeral. So this was just totally new to me. There's intrigue, doppelgangers, there's betrayal, but makes it such a great read for summer. The author does an amazing job with such a complex, kind of setup, wrangling all this together. But the provoking question is, what would we sacrifice for a different life?
Interesting.
Beautiful.
Lori, what about you? I mean, you're reading The Calamity Club now, which looks like it could be a 5-pound book there, but also kind of a page turner.
Well, for me, summer reading is the time to relax into a book. And I love to sit on my front porch with a good book. Some authors make me feel like I'm catching up with a longtime friend. Ann Patchett, Catherine Stockett, and David Sedaris are just a few. So I'll talk just briefly about another one I haven't read. Oh, I don't think I have it. It didn't make the bag. Whistler by Ann Patchett, which just came out, I think, last week. It's just, I haven't read it, but I can't wait. Somehow, when I'm reading Ann Patchett's books, I just feel really comfortable. I love the way she writes. So Whistler, it's interesting. It has an image on the cover of a beautiful horse. But I watched her on the Seth Meyers show. She's been on all the shows. And she explained that the horse really doesn't have much to do with the story at all. Because when you look at the book, you might think, oh, it's about horses, it's about the West. And actually, it's set in New York City. And the horse only plays a very small part. So it was interesting that she wanted that for the cover. And she had the artist do several different renditions of the horse. And then it's really not in the book. But anyway, it takes place in New York City, where a chance encounter changes everything for two characters. And we all know Ann Patchett because she wrote The Dutch House, Bel Canto, and most recently Tom Lake.
So, Lori, I did read that Whistler.
Did you?
And I did enjoy it. There is something summery about reading Patchett, I think.
I think so.
And Kate's point, this is a rare book about kind people trying to be kind. And who doesn't need models for that?
That's right.
And she is such a force in American letters because she advocates for other writers unstintingly. And so she gets points out of the gate. So I would like to just second your direction toward the Whistler.
And
Thank
I'll
you.
give it a third. Just
go.
if there is such a thing as a sure bet at the library, it's an Ann Patchett, and what a way to start summer
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah.
Right.
That was on my list of books to ask about, was Whistler by Ann Patchett. We're going to take a break in a second, but George, thoughts on what you grab as summer reading? Any
Okay,
patterns?
well, yeah, first of all, Thridi Umrigar,
Local author, 3D Umar.
local author Thridi Umrigar, wonderful writer, and I am just starting Missing Sam, her latest novel. I'm a few chapters into it. Thridi's a terrific writer. Her explorations of gender and culture and ethnicity are always fascinating. But in addition, if you're a Cleveland if you're a Clevelander, or especially a Cleveland Heightser, Thridi lives in Cleveland Heights, you're reading this novel basically takes place in my front yard. She's walking down Lee Road. She's buying bagels. The protagonist is buying bagels at Stone Oven. They're getting ready for a shopping trip at the West Side Market. So it's great fun to read for that reason, apart from being a marvelous novel in its own right.
And I think it says something that two of the panelists, you and Lori, both brought Missing Sam
Yes.
today to give a shout out to. So Missing Sam by Thridi Umrigar. Again, a friend of the show. I know she's been on before. If you're joining us, this is The Sound of Ideas. Time to take a quick break, but we'll continue talking books on the other side. And we want to keep hearing your recommendations. SOI@ideastream.org or 866-578-0903. I'm Drew Mazias. This is The Sound of Ideas. We'll be right back. This is The Sound of Ideas from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Drew Mazias, in today for Stephanie Haney. Thanks so much for joining us for our summer book recommendation show. In studio, I have Karen Long, Kate Merline, Lori Muller-Zaim, and George Bilger. We're taking your recommendations, 866-578-0903 or SOI@ideastream.org. We also have a bevy of suggestions, as you can tell by the plentiful books on the desk here. Again, SOI@ideastream.org with your thoughts or comments. We did get an email from Jean from Mayfield Heights. She asks if there are any recommendations for historic novels not about war. Full disclosure, I asked this during the break, and I think I may have stumped the panel a little bit.
Panel, yeah.
Historic novel not about war. Maybe we'll email her after the show.
Well, Mule Boy
Boy,
counts as one of those.
That could count.
Yep.
That was the first one we recommended on the show. Yeah. And that leads me into a question about current affairs. I've also been thinking about the 250th anniversary of America, which we're kind of marking this summer. So particularly for Kate or Lori, anything that you're having a hard time keeping in stock, people have been asking about either at the library or the bookshop related to the 250th anniversary of America or current political events, that sort of thing?
Sure. So at Fireside, the book that is hot right now is There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America by Brian Goldstone. It won the Pulitzer. It's written in the form of a novel and examines homelessness in America through the story of 5 families in Atlanta. And it explains how the bureaucracy and hurdles involved for getting assistance often don't help. And it's about, like I said, it's about the working people in America who can't afford a home. So, yeah, important and compelling read.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been getting great emails from our listeners, and Dan Moulthrop, president and CEO of the City Club, sent us a couple thoughts. David Greenberg's biography of John Lewis, A Life, and The Last Sweet Bite by Michael Sheikh, locally born author, and Bite by Amy Nezukumatil, who we also had on the show not too long ago. Colored Television by Tessa Hulls, Feeding Ghosts from last year's Anisfield Book Awards, and he's rereading Catch-22 and Slaughterhouse-5. War fiction is very relevant today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel you have to read Catch-22 about every 2 years just to keep your insanity intact. That's just a book that never gets old.
Yeah.
And in the political realm, I would be remiss, I think, Drew, if I didn't hold up for your listeners the fact that all the books selected this year for Anisfield Wolf are debut novels. So you can come in at the beginning of these writers' literary lives. They'll all be here in September. They are all beautiful books that confront racism and our struggles to become a more perfect union, which are at the baseboards of this country. And so you can jump on the Anisfield Wolf website and find something glorious. The Lifetime Achievement winner this year is Nell Irvin Painter, who I adore, for her book called Old at Art School. When she was 64, she walked away from a tenured job and decided to be a painter.
Nice. Nice. Always good recommendations from the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards. David from Cleveland Heights emails, and he said he loves getting book recommendations from librarians. A couple that he got recently was Bel Canto, which I think was already brought up, and Night Circus, which he hadn't read yet, but is looking forward to that as well. Let's do another around the horn, because I know you all brought plenty of suggestions. So, Karen, what's another one that you want to recommend to our audience?
So, kind of sticking with, I'm going to switch in mid-sentence. I love books in translation, and American readers spend less than 3% of their reading lives on books from the rest of the world, which seems so parochial. And two of them made my list this year, and one that was written by a Mexican writer, translated into English, is a sensation in Europe this year. It's called Eating Ashes by Brenda Navarro, and it is based on an unnamed narrator who has a voice like a contemporary Holden Caulfield. I was so shocked at how beautiful, angry, insightful this narrator is, because she and her brother have come to Madrid from Mexico, where there's a whole culture of people who work in menial dead-end jobs. And in his despair, her teenage brother ends his life. It's at the beginning of Eating Ashes. I thought, I'm out. I don't want to read this book. But that voice was like a tractor beam and just pulled me through this experience and this whole Mexican, Colombian, Venezuelan people who work in Spain and are looked down on in Spain experience that I will be thinking about probably for the rest of my life.
One of the reasons I love this show is because we have great interactions with our audience members. And as I asked the question about historical fiction, Austin Cleon wrote in, who we've had on the show. He says, for the person that asked about historical fiction, not about war, Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather.
Yes.
Just read it, and it's fantastic. And that's from Austin Cleon, who was on the list from Kate
Yes.
for a favorite local author. So
Wow.
how about that for
Wow,
yes.
wow.
So what a wonderful segue. So
Sure.
I'm going to talk about Don't Call It Art, 10 Ways to Create Like a Kid Again. And this is by Austin Kleon, and that's amazing that he wrote in. And this little book is so inspiring. And it is a little book. If you know his books, like Steal Like an Artist, they're like little square.
Right.
This one's hot pink. It's wonderful. And in it, he shares 10 lessons in creativity that he learned from just observing his two young sons. And, you know, who is least hampered by that, you know, critical thought, you know, bubble that goes through our head, you know, saying you can't do this, you can't do that, than children, right? So this is partly a book on reclaiming our creativity in small steps, but it's also kind of a parenting book too. And, you know, I think summer is the perfect time to kind of reclaim that free play, that excitement, that creativity, doing something else. And I just want to shout out, he's going to be speaking at our Parma Snow Auditorium tonight.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great timing there. Lori, another recommendation.
So I just finished reading Rick Steves' new book, On the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu and the Making of a Travel Writer. So we all know who Rick Steves is, of course. But in 1978, when he was 23, he got his friend Gene to take this trip with him from Istanbul to Kathmandu. And it's based on his journal that he kept during that trip. And what a trip. Oh my gosh, imagine 1978. Rick was a piano teacher in his former life. And he'd already traveled in Europe quite a bit, but the adventures of a lifetime were awaiting him on this trip. They traveled through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and then ended in Nepal. 3,000 miles. It took them about 8 weeks. And the nice thing is, it has all these great photographs. And remember, that's before we had iPhones, and they allowed themselves 9 pictures a day because they had a limited amount of film. And he got just excellent pictures of the people that they encountered on the way, some of the sights that they saw. They hitchhiked, they traveled by bus, rickshaw, bicycle, boat, train, and some scary planes. And they made it and just had a great trip.
I can't read that one because I've interviewed Rick Steves before. I love his stuff. I think he's got a great voice, and I think it's very interesting that people usually think of him as a European travel writer.
And
but
that's
this,
his niche.
yeah,
That's what he
but
does.
having him go to kind of the Asia is pretty interesting.
And he says that if anyone asks him what his favorite country is, he always comes up with India. So
Hippie trail. Yeah. One more recommendation from you.
Well, first
yeah.
of all,
Yeah.
I wish that our friends who travel to Europe and come back would only take 9 pictures. That would be, here are 9 pictures of our trip.
I feel very
That's
seen.
great.
so-
Secondly, I'm not one to boast, but quite often in the summers, my family goes to Berlin, and we spend some time in Europe and travel around a bit. I have been mistaken twice for Rick Steves. Not Brad Pitt, but Rick Steves. People have come up and said, "Are you Rick Steves?" And I guess there's some kind of connection.
He's always doing the polo shirt.
Yeah,
button-up
yeah.
shirts,
Anyway, first of all, I want to mention a book I just read outside of the novel genre, a collection of poems that I want to recommend by everybody's favorite poet, Billy Collins.
yeah.
It's called Dog Show. It came out in 2026, and I thought, I'm a poet. I'm on this show. I should read a poem. So I want to give you one Billy Collins poem. It's a beautiful book with beautiful paintings of dogs accompanying every single poem. And this poem is called, This poem is called The Collar. A dog's collar typically features a silvery D ring where the leash is clipped on, and usually the pendants of a gray rabies tag, and a smaller ID bearing a number and his name, which can work to unhinge your heart when the collar is slipped over his ears and off his body, freeing him for good.
Dog Show by Billy
Dog
Collins.
Show by Billy Collins. And then back to that segue we mentioned, my summer reading plan is, first of all, to read Thriddy's book, but then I want to reread all of Willa Cather. And I'm starting with a favorite Willa Cather novel. This is my favorite Willa Cather novel. It's called A Lost Lady. It's short. When you think of Willa Cather, you think of My Antonia, Death Comes for the Archbishop. But this is a little marvel of a novel. It's a coming-of-age novel set in Nebraska in the 1920s, and it is just marvelous. I love this novel so much that I made a literary pilgrimage one summer to her birthplace, a beautiful little town called Red Cloud, Nebraska, and spending some time in those infinitely vast spaces really helps you read the novels in a different and deeper way. So.
Well, I'm glad we got to hear you read a poem, one by Billy Collins, because we did have an email from Dave that says, enjoyed reading George Belgair's poetry, Blood Pages and Cheap Motels of My Youth.
I like that guy, yeah.
So another great moment here. And I'd be remiss if I didn't recommend a book as we get back to our European travel discussion. It's called Epic Continent by Nicholas Jubber. I just read it. He retraces the paths of all the epics from Europe. He starts in Greece and talks about the Odyssey. He goes up through Germany and talks about the Nibelungenlied. Goes through the UK, talks about Beowulf, but he does it all to the backdrop of the migrant crisis in Europe in the late aughts, and talks about all these North African and Syrian refugees coming into the continent and how that is shaping their political discussion. And he just plays off of the great epic stories of the past and the lessons he's learned from that. So, Epic Continent by Nicholas Jebber I just finished and really, really loved. Question from an audience member about social media and how you've seen social media impact reading. Are there trends online? Are there things people are avoiding? Do you think it's making us more or less averse to reading certain kinds of books? Do you see?
For sure.
Kate?
There's
Yeah.
Book Talk, there's Bookstagram, anything that's being lifted on Booktop, we can't keep on the shelf. So I think it has created a whole new conversation around books that for people that may not have had that space for that. And it's I think it's all to the good. And what Book Talk has really done has been to lift up older titles and give them new lives. Like Madeline Miller's Circe, she had kind of a hard time with her publishing career, and it got lifted on Book Talk, and now she can write full time. So I think it's all to the good.
The supervising producer Rachel Rood just went to Greece and just read or is reading The Song of Achilles, her other book. So highly
a good
recommend
one,
that
too.
one as
Wonderful.
well. Yeah. Lori, thoughts on Book Talk, social media? Are people coming in looking? No. Another thing I wanted to shout out were just a couple titles that we got from people here at IdeaStream. Environmental reporter Zaria Johnson is revisiting W.E.B. Du Bois' Dark Water, Voices from Within the Veil. Also just finished reading The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants for her book club. Deputy editor Andrew Meyer said Carl Hyacin is what he goes to when he always thinks of a beach read.
Oh, that's a good one.
Fever Beach is what he's reading now.
Yeah.
And then maybe we'll use this as a jumping off point. Pat Miller, who's in our marketing department, said he's reading The Chronicles of Narnia with his 7-year-old Henry. He just finished first grade, and they've gone through The Magician's Nephew and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Any children's book recommendations as we start closing out on the hour? Lori, I see you have
I have two. Well,
Yeah.
so Calvin and Hobbes, I wouldn't really call a children's book, but Fireside Bookshop has every Calvin and Hobbes book. Okay. And I checked, we've sold, let me check, 7,899 Calvin and Hobbes books since they first were published, starting in 1987. Bill Watterson grew up in Chagrin Falls, and then he became a bit of a recluse, doesn't write the comic strip anymore. He was disenchanted. There was a rumor that he used to come into the bookstore and sign his books when no one was looking. I don't know how true that is, but it's kind of a fun thing. And for years, people who wanted to get a hold of Bill Watterson sent their letters to Fireside Bookshop. And we would call his mother, who lived down the street, and she'd come and pick them up. So that's our Calvin and Hobbes a little bit. And then let me just mention Heartstopper Volume 6 is coming out July 7th. And Heartstopper is just a hugely popular, it's an LGBTQ graphic novel. My daughter told me I have those letters mixed up. It's a graphic novel for young adults, and it's Nick and Charlie, and they deal with life, love, and everything in between. And there's actually Netflix has a show called Heartstopper based on the book. It's by Alice Oseman.
wonderful.
So
Can I
it's
ask a
great.
question?
Absolutely.
I have a 13-year-old son and a 9-year-old. Can anyone on this panel give me some can't-miss recommendations for summer reading for them?
I can.
Yeah.
Car Trip, audiobook, Harry Potter, or ask your librarian, ask your bookseller what's well produced, and let the whole family ride. It can be a superb part of your summer, and it can reignite the desire for storytelling.
Yeah. Well, when I was a kid, I spent my summers reading, and part of the reason for that was we had a wonderful little library just down the street. We lived in Riverside, California, and it was air conditioned, and our house wasn't. And it was a way to get cool, and air conditioning partly led to my becoming a writer. But yeah, the idea of a family reading together, sharing, talking about stories you've read. That's what I want to happen this summer for us.
Well, and I have to say, if you're going to do that, you definitely have to join the Summer Reading Challenge at your local library. The theme this year is Unearth a Story, and so there's a lot of dinosaurs. But if you play as a family, it's for all ages. Visit
Yeah.
your local library.
I know the
sign up.
dinosaurs thing has been going on.
It is.
My
and
kids are kind of post to dinosaurs, though.
It's
So
okay,
it's okay, okay.
but come in, get recommendations, get prizes, and
Okay.
just read
We
every
will.
day.
Okay.
Dinosaurs was one of the things that drew me to Calvin and Hobbes. I always loved Bill Watterson's dinosaur strips. I wish we had more time for more book recommendations. We will have a whole list on our website, but we have to wrap it up. This hour always goes by too quickly. George Bilger, Kate Merline, Karen Long, and Lori Muller-Zaim, thank you so much for a great hour and a fun conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Drew,
And happy reading.
wrangling us.
Yes, happy to do it. If you missed any part of today's show, you can hear a rebroadcast tonight at 9 on 89.7 WKSU. You can also find every episode of The Sound of Ideas wherever you get your podcasts and on the IdeaStream Public Media YouTube page. To get the last word on today's topics, send an email to soi@ideastream.org. You can also find us on Instagram or at The Sound of Ideas. Last Thursday, we had a robust discussion about data centers, and Steven sent us this message. I'm getting very frustrated hearing about people talk about the responsible or ethical use of AI. The AI companies choose to build their systems with stolen data, which means it is not possible to use those systems responsibly because every time you use them, you are helping yourself to other people's work without consent or compensation while enriching the AI companies. I think one requirement for building data centers should be that any and all data is only stored there with the permission of the owner of that data. Thanks so much, Stephen. Tomorrow on The Sound of Ideas, we'll learn more about reporting from the Marshall Project about broken security cameras and the implications of that at the Cuyahoga County Jail. And then we'll dive into the high prevalence of tick bites this season and why we're seeing such a surge in those numbers. I'm Drew Mazias, in for Stephanie Haney. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.